Today on Inside Utah Politics, Utah's real estate market, some wild swings in the last year, the latest on current conditions and where it could go from here. And the highest honor Congress can award. Law enforcement officers recognized for defending the U.S. Capitol during the attack last year.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glen Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Thomas Wright, President and CEO of Sotheby's Real Estate. He's here to go in depth on Utah's real estate market. Thomas, appreciate your time being here on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Glenn.
So I had you on last July. You remember that, and we were talking about current conditions, and my goodness, what a swing. It's done a 180 pretty much. So talk about how we've seen things change in such a short amount of time.
Well, yeah, I mean, we saw one of the hottest real estate markets in American history. It was off the hook. A lot of people did really well. Buyers really struggled. And then the Federal Reserve realized later in 2021 that they needed to cool things down, that it was a runaway market with really high inflation. And so earlier this year in May, they started to increase interest rates. And so we really saw the peak of the market about that April 22nd is kind of where we're calling it. And after that, they started to increase rates, and they've done a good job, if that's what they were trying to do, of slowing down the real estate market and the overall economy. And I can tell you that we have seen it change since I was here last July. And
what does that mean for, start off with buyers? What does it mean, what we've seen happen in the last year or so?
It's a little healthier market for buyers. The inventory that we have on the market right now in the state of Utah is about double what we had last year. It's still only about 3.5 months supply of inventory. That's still low. We could use more inventory on the market for sure, but buyers feel like they're in a much better position than they did last year just because it was so crazy. So it's still a good market for sellers. We still could use inventory, but buyers are finding more inventory than they found last year in the peak, and that's primarily because interest rates have cooled the market.
When you take a look at that, though, how has that impacted? It obviously does what a buyer can qualify for.
Yeah, I mean, when you have interest rates that were, below 3%, and then suddenly they're over 7%, now they've come back down a little bit into the 6s, that really limits what people can purchase, and that's what the Federal Reserve really was trying to do. That, in addition to the huge debt they have on their balance sheet, was the reason that they wanted to make that happen. So yeah, you see buyers now, they shop payment when they're borrowing money, and so higher interest rates make it less affordable. And we have an affordable housing crisis in this state already, so that's been hard to watch.
What should a seller know at this point in time?
It's still a good market. You can't price aspirationally. We used to price in 2021 a little ahead of the market because the prices were appreciating and we were trying to stay ahead of the market. Now you have to realize that there was a peak. We've come down a little bit off the high, that we're not going to have 24% appreciation like we had in 21. We're not going to have 16% appreciation like we had in 2020. But that you're going to have to be a little more reasonable with price. But anyone who thinks there's going to be a huge price correction or that there has been is mistaken. There hasn't been, and I personally don't think there will be.
And that's an interesting point. You provided me with some data from October of last year to October of this year. New listings down, pending sales down, closed sales down, but median sales price and average sales price up.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? So you look at the numbers and you see the sales volume is down about 20%. The pended contracts, meaning people that are under contract to purchase, is also down about 20%. The inventory's doubled, like we talked about, but the list to sell ratio, in other words, when somebody buys a property, what percentage of the list price are they paying is still really high. And that's because properties that are in really good condition, that are priced well in this market, are selling. There are still a lot of buyers in the market. It's still a fantastic time to sell, and the market still needs inventory.
Did you ever think we would be looking at the market we are seeing right now here in the state of Utah?
We have a couple of rules at Sotheby's International Realty. One of them is don't predict the future. You just don't know in the housing market. But the one thing you do know is that it's cyclical. Real estate is cyclical. We saw a real big run up, 40% appreciation in 2 years. We all knew that that wasn't going to continue and that it would pull back and that we would have a time like this where the market would cool, things would settle. And quite honestly, Glenn, it's good for the market to be where we are and to have a little bit of equilibrium coming back.
Okay, when we talk about the prices, though, and the next generation, your kids and mine, how are they going to afford to live here? Because right now, the average sales price, and I believe this is statewide, still $582,000. Actually, that's up to $620,000 now. The median sales price, $492,000. those are prices that you and I would have never even imagined when we were getting into our first homes.
Oh, I totally agree, and this is the heartbreaking part of it. We've got to find a solution for this. Utah is always innovative and always figures out these intractable issues. So how do we solve the problem? Well, it's a couple things. Number one, our zoning laws are 50, 60, 70 years old. They don't match where we are now. We've got to look at those from top to bottom. But really, Glenn, what we need is we need a statewide plan. And we need it in rural Utah, but we also need it along the Wasatch Front. You remember the days when you could drive from Payson to Layton and you were driving through different communities. And you'd go through, you know, Orem and Lehigh, and then you get to Draper and Sandy. Now it's one big continuous metropolitan area. And we are allowing the housing decisions to be made at the local level, which is great, except for we're all in a big macro economy and metropolitan area. So we need to have a metropolitan Wasatch Front plan for housing that includes affordable housing, that requires us to look at the zoning, impact costs, and we need to be more innovative with the materials we use, how we build homes. There's got to be a lot of innovation, and that's on the horizon. It's happening.
Talk a little more about the zoning, though. What are you talking about? Are you talking about going for more density?
Whenever you use the word density, people automatically think we're talking about apartment buildings or high rises in their backyard. We're not talking about that. We're talking about detached single-family homes on their own lot with their yard, but maybe instead of 4 per acre, maybe we're doing 5 per acre or 6 per acre or a couple more per acre. That dramatically brings down the cost of housing. But when you can't do that because the master plan or the zoning is so old and antiquated, then what happens is you create this urban sprawl. And the only place you can do it is further out. And the more we develop and go out, we know what happens in metropolitan areas. We already have air quality problems. We already have transportation congestion. We already know we have to build more schools and more roads when we do that. There's a better way to do it, but we need a master plan for housing along the Wasatch Front and in rural Utah.
Well, and we also know in a valley, there's only so much room you can build geographically anyway.
And we're running out of it. And that's part of it. So the cities have done a great job, but we all need to chip in and we need to say, let's look at it, let's look at it in a holistic way, and let's try to all of us do our best job to not have the NIMBYism. You know, everybody wants more affordable housing, but they don't want it in their backyard. And we've got to figure out a way where we can put it in all of our communities so that our kids and grandkids can live the Utah lifestyle and they can afford to stay here. That's so important to us and our values.
Yeah, for sure. Can that be done?
It can be done. There's no question about it. There's a lot of good people working on this. I want to applaud legislative leadership who are working really tirelessly on this issue. The cities and towns in Utah are looking at it. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to make some hard decisions. The low-hanging fruit, the easy fruit to pick on housing has been picked. ADUs, we saw that bill and other bills go through the legislature. The hard stuff is now here, and we're going to have hard conversations. And the citizens of this state really are going to need to be a part of it and step up and support policy that allows a little bit more density and different kinds of housing in innovative ways. And if we do that, yes, we can absolutely solve this problem.
You already talked about the housing prices here in the state, and you don't think that's going to change?
I don't see housing. The prices, you know, like I said, 16% appreciation in 20, 24% appreciation in 21.
I mean, those are just
those are gone. And you've seen a little, you know, pull back to normal, but there's not going to be a big correction, primarily because the cost to replace housing is so much more expensive, right? With inflation, the materials are kind of permanently higher. Some have fluctuated like lumber, but by and large, most materials are just more expensive. And then labor is more expensive. The labor shortage caused a run on salaries and wages that isn't going to come back. That's probably a positive, but that makes everything more expensive. So the replacement cost looks really good when you're looking to buy a home versus whether or not you want to build or not.
Yeah. You already said it's your strategy not to try to say what's going to happen in a year, but just indulge us, if you will, here. Where do you see the market going in the next year?
Well, I believe the Federal Reserve will continue to do what they say they're going to do, and that is raise rates. And maybe they'll change course, but I take them at their word. So far, they've done what they said they were going to do, and those increases in interest rates are going to cause unemployment, not just in the housing sector where contractors and subcontractors are going to have a lot less work than they had in years past. So there will be higher unemployment. I think we're headed into this recession and this correction. I think it will be a good part of 23, and hopefully we can get equilibrium back in a lot of different areas of our economics, and then we can start to recover and start to grow again.
It's kind of unbelievable the difference in the 1 year from the last time you were on
Isn't
here
it
talking about
unbelievable?
this.
Yeah. And it's a lesson too, right? I mean, there's a lot of factors in play, but it's a real lesson that when the government intervenes and does massive bailouts and massive stimulus packages and they spend that kind of money and they incur that kind of debt, $9 trillion on the Fed's balance sheet. Last year, our federal government incurred over $1 trillion deficit of spending versus what they took in. These things have consequences. We've got to get the national debt under control and our spending under control in this country, or we're going to have these big fluctuations.
All right, interesting stuff. Really appreciate your insights. Thanks so much for being here.
Yep.
Still to come, arts and culture. It's an industry that gets a lot of attention from the state legislature. We'll have a preview on what's on the table for the upcoming session. But first, overcrowding at our national parks, how big the problem is and what solutions are being considered. That's right after the break. Top House and Senate leaders presenting law enforcement officers who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 with congressional gold medals. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson has reaction from the ceremony.
It is the highest honor given by Congress.
It is an emotional day for all of us.
In one of her last ceremonies as Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi and congressional leadership awarded congressional gold medals to law enforcement officers who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021.
They answered the call to serve, putting their lives on the line.
During the ceremony, family members of fallen officer Brian Sicknick refused to shake hands with Republican leaders. Still, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy says this award is an appreciation for all law enforcement.
Putting on the badge means putting yourselves in harm's way to protect others, to keep the country safe.
And Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said the officers stood strong in defending democracy.
And not just this institution, but our system of self-government.
Their quick thinking, their valor, their ability to stay calm in the face of violence undoubtedly saved lives that day.
The medals will now be placed in 4 locations: at the U.S. Capitol Police Headquarters, the Metropolitan Police Department, the Capitol, and the Smithsonian. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
Members of Congress holding a hearing on the issue of overcrowding at national parks around the country. The problem impacting both visitors and the parks. And with 5 national parks in our state alone, Utah Representative Blake Moore taking the floor to express his concern. Washington correspondent Alexander Lamone reports.
The national park system is struggling to both protect the parks and manage a surge of pandemic visitors.
Some parks, like Yosemite, are national attractions. For parks like that, overcrowding must be actively managed.
Members of Congress, like California's Katie Porter and Utah's Blake Moore, are concerned about how crowd management will impact future access.
Can you expound a little bit on the potential of Zion National Park opening up new trails? Are you supportive of this? Have you worked on anything on this regard?
We have opened some new trails, and we have some plans in addition.
Lawmakers also want to ensure the landscapes and wildlife people are flocking to see remain protected. Colorado Congressman Joe Neguse asked about the plans for implementing more reservation systems in 2023.
Which, as you know, has been used as a pilot in a variety of different national parks.
Well, it's not one size fits all.
Officials also say the national park system hasn't always had the resources it needs to address these problems, but hope that changes after a 22% increase in their budget from last year's infrastructure law. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Coming up, the legislative session is just weeks away, and advocates for the arts have a packed agenda. More on that after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
We turn now to the upcoming legislative session and the impact it could have on the arts. For that, we welcome Crystal Young to the show. She is the Executive Director of the Utah Cultural Alliance. Crystal, welcome back to the show. Great to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Let's start off with the state of arts and culture here in the state of Utah. You have 2020 data, which is pretty significant when you think about that's when the pandemic hit. So tell us the very latest on how the industry is doing here in our state.
Absolutely. So that 2020 data put together by Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute showed that this industry is 9% of the state's GDP and 1 in 12 jobs. And as you mentioned, that is the pandemic data. So we were the second highest hit industry after leisure and hospitality. And I do have our 2021 numbers, even though we haven't publicly released them, but only the jobs numbers are the only ones I have. And we lost about 9% of our total workforce in 2020, and all of that came back in 2021. In fact, we had about a 1% growth from where we were in 2019.
That's pretty fascinating when you think of the impact, because theaters had to shut down. How did it still turn out to be a decent year for the industry?
100% that is due to the Utah State Legislature and Governor Cox. President Adams, Speaker Wilson are heroes. They made an early and quick investment into this industry. At the end of the day, we didn't end up being, the highest per capita rescue investment into cultural industries, but they invested early and faster than everybody else did with a very significant amount of money, about $40 million over 2 years. And that early and swift action is what saved our industry.
It's incredible when you look back at when we were growing up in Utah to where we are now, and just the venues that we have available, the acts that are coming here that never did before. Talk about the importance of arts and culture in everyday life. One of the upsides, I think, of the pandemic is we were always able to talk about the quantitative impacts, the economic numbers, the benefit that arts does for kids' grades, but we could never say this is the magic that it brings, this is the value that it brings to your life in a qualitative way. And now with the pandemic, instead of being a thought experiment of what is your life like without arts and entertainment, it can become, we all know what it's like because it sucked. That's true. That's putting it mildly.
Right?
In a family-friendly way.
In a family-friendly way, exactly. I mean, I was devastated personally, but for so many of us, we were missing those connective points, the parts where we tell our stories, where we're entertained, where we get a little bit of an escape from our daily stresses. And that's why it's so important to recognize the arts aren't just nice to have, they are a necessity. This is our life, how we tell our stories, how we live.
I mean, family bonding, just so many opportunities there. Let's get into the legislative session because that is a big part, as you have already mentioned, when it comes to our art and culture industry here in the state of Utah. One of the big things that you're really working on this year is a fraud-related bill. Talk to us about that when it comes to ticketing.
Absolutely. I'm sure all of us have experienced kind of the messy experience when you go on Google to search for, maybe, whatever hot show. I just saw Lizzo, whoever. It's about 15, 20 links before you actually get to the real ticketing site, the original ticketing site. And that's okay. We have no problem with the secondary ticketing market, but it's hard for consumers to know when they're actually on the face value primary ticketing website and when they're not. And Utah has been a leader. We have worked with the legislature for a number of years on this topic. We have some legislation in place that protects consumers, but we need more. We have consumers who swear up and down that they bought the ticket on arttix.org or from whomever, and then maybe the show got canceled and the broker got the refund and then the secondary ticketing buyer did not. There's just a few issues. We also get consumers complaining about skyrocketing fees, both on the primary and secondary ticketing website. I've had so many calls from legislators on fees in the last few months. And so this bill is meant to address this in a little further way than we have before.
Talk about how that will work, though. Like, what specifically will it do to address these issues?
Some of the issues in the bill right now, and again, we will have to negotiate. We are negotiating with national interests on this bill. So what happens at the end of the day might be a little bit different, since in Utah we work together. But what we are proposing is increasing a few of the disclosure requirements that Utah already requires. So it's even more, I think, clear to the average consumer where they're purchasing and where they're not. We are encouraging, including disclosures into the SEO language, and so that way when you are on the search page, you would know if you're on a secondary or primary website. The bill does have a cap on fees. That is something that will definitely be negotiated at some point.
And this is something you've taken pieces from laws in other states to try to come up with something that will work for us in our state.
Absolutely. Every element in the bill comes in a large section, if not a majority of the states. There is one element, a pop-up disclosure, that's new. Hopefully we get that across the finish line, but we'll see. We intentionally stayed away from a number of regulations that other states do that just were not a good fit for Utah. And so this will not be, the most aggressive bill, but it will be a bill that helps consumers and helps art small businesses.
Okay, an exciting program that you all are launching, the K-12 Arts Education Strategic Plan. Talk to us what that's all about.
Absolutely. So, sometimes we jokingly talk about the Utah way, but I actually believe in it. and I think one source of that magic is the already strong system and love for arts and entertainment that we enjoy in this state. We have incredible programs like Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Learning Program, POPS and IC. Many of our school districts across the state have great theater, drama, dancing, digital arts, music, etc. Don't judge me if I left one out. And we all work together, and we have a wonderful system that is working. But we have some opportunity with the relationships we have built with the legislature to address how these programs are funded. As well as thinking about what is the big picture that we're looking for the Utah child. Because again, our end goal isn't that every child become a concert pianist professionally. I would not be sad if every child was capable of that, had that skill set. But we want them to take what they learn from piano into their workforce, into their communities, and into their families. And we all know that there are intangible things you learn when you're exposed to these creative practices like mental elasticity, academics, et cetera. So this is a 3-year project that we are doing with various entities in arts education space and with the legislature itself and with support from leadership. And we will come back with a series of proposals to make sure that no kids get missed from our existing system, and are there even better ways that we can bring these very important benefits to kids.
You will be giving out a Lifetime Cultural Champion Award in February. You can't say who it's going to, but tell us a little bit about what the award is about and what goes into selecting who will get it.
Absolutely. We do have this long history of Utahns loving and supporting culture, and a strong history of champions at the legislature who do that as well. And our intention with this award is to really call out the individuals who kind of rise up and lead in helping our industry be able to better serve Utahns and better transform lives with the support that they provide for us. And that's not just the help that they give, to our nonprofits through grants from the state. It's not just the arts education that they invest in. It's also policy like the ticketing bill and the historic rehabilitation tax credit. There's a lot of policy that helps create an environment where our creatives can do their job and transform lives. And so every year we look at a legislative champion who has done something or multiple things throughout their career. And the individual who it is going to be going to this year is someone who is a true champion, who has rescued this industry and is deserving of this award and so many more.
All right, we will keep an eye on that. And the session just weeks away. Hard to believe that, but here we go again. Really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. We've been talking about it, the legislative session coming up. State lawmakers returning to Utah's Capitol Hill on Tuesday, January 17th. For opening day, Governor Spencer Cox will deliver the State of the State address 2 days later, Thursday the 19th, and then the final day of the session is Friday, March 3rd. Make sure to connect with me on social media or through email. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on social media. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah Politics.